beautiful.
Hello, lovers of the world. This is Sinta speaking. It is once again time to summarize what I read this month. I have already tried filming this video like 3 times, and each time I was not satisfied with the final product. So this is basically my 4th attempt at filming this video. Hopefully we finally get it right. Today is the 25th of January and I'm filming this at 10:57 p.m. So I have read 4 books since my last video, and despite what I said in that last video, all of them have been Agatha Christie books. Sometimes I wonder if my entire life is just going to be cycling through Agatha Christie's bibliography over and over, because I will read a book, I will put it aside and wait to reread it until I've forgotten the plot, and then I will go on to repeat that cycle for basically 300 plus novels that she's written. As I said in my last vlog, there will be no spoilers for any of the books. I tend to go ham, go crazy, go stupid on the reviewing in my other dedicated videos, but in this one it's just going to be general feelings and some thoughts. But before I get into what I read in January, I must talk about Postern of Fate by Agatha Christie. If you watched my last reading vlog video, you'll know that I read Postern of Fate, and I didn't really go in depth in that video because I initially had planned to talk about this book in depth in its own video, like whether it's gonna be a video where I talk about standalone Agatha Christie's or like just any kind of Agatha Christie video that is not about Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple, something like that. And I think I could still do it maybe in the future if I want to do like a Tommy and Tuppence series overview or something like that. But I definitely don't think I'll be doing that anytime soon. And in case I don't end up doing that or abandoning that project, I at least want to dump my thoughts about that book now so I could comfortably say that I have spoken about it in my channel. And there will be no spoilers on this because I really hated this book in such a way that I feel like I have no words to even explain all the things that I disliked about this book. So it's kind of hard to even spoil it at all because how can I? I just don't know what to say about it. So this is my first Tommy and Tuppence book that I've ever finished. So Tommy and Tuppence is its own series that Agatha Christie had written that were more spy action adjacent, and I was never really a big fan of that kind of vibe for her, even though she kind of hinted at it in her past books. It's just not what I want from her. Like, I really like this super standard classic whodunit. I tried to read one of their first books. I can't remember the title of that book now, but I remember getting a few pages in before realizing that this is just not for me. Like, I think it's just like a genre thing. Like, I chose this book in particular because I read the synopsis and it felt like this was very murder mystery adjacent, enough so that I was interested and I thought the premise was interesting. And since Tommy and Tuppence are older, they are not likely to be doing the spy action activities that they were doing earlier in the series. So Tommy and Tuppence are a married couple, and as far as I know, they're supposed to be like agents for the British Secret Service, and they started off the series as plucky young adults wanting to serve their country after World War One. They just kind of go on adventures and are commissioned by other people to do things for the greater good, etc. And so this book, Postern of Fate, is not only them at the very like twilight of their years, the characters, but this is also one of the very last things. I think this is the last thing that Agatha Christie wrote. She must have written this when she was about, I don't know, 80 years old. And so I guess that definitely played into the overall quality of the book, I'm going to be honest. And it's crazy because I actually chose this book not knowing that this was going to be the last thing that she had written. I also didn't know that this book was pretty much universally disliked by a lot of Agatha Christie fans. Funnily enough, I had read this pretty much directly after I had finished Lord Edgware Dies, which is not only one of her earliest works, but it is also one of the more popular ones because of its very striking title and very ingenious plot. And I personally think it is a very solid and high quality book from her. So to me, when I was reading Postern of Fate, I would just felt this like sinking feeling of like, whoa, how the mighty have fallen, like how much her skill of writing has changed over the decades. And I really wanted to make this work. I really did. I thought this had a lot of potential. I said the premise was really interesting. And in fact, I think I could have liked Tommy and Tuppence maybe if I read their earlier books and have built a relationship with them. But I felt that they had a good relationship. I guess because they're much older now, then there's not really much there's no way for their relationship to really like develop any further. And so, but usually that's kind of the thing that we want to see. Like that's the entertainment value of like how the more they learn of each other and how that romance built. And you can tell they have a lot of affection for each other in this, which I tend to like. But again, like I don't know, it's just everything about the book, like quality wise, it's just drags everything down, and it really bummed me out. I genuinely felt like I deserved an award for finishing this book because so many times I just wanted to put it down. So I read this through an audiobook, and then at some point towards the end, I just really wanted to like speed it up. Like I just really wanted to finish it because I didn't really enjoy being in their company, in Tommy and Tuppence's company. Every time we talk to them, any kind of conversation they have was just them yapping at each other, to each other, or to other people. And it never went anywhere, and it would be like incomprehensible. I'm like, what is the point of this conversation? It wasn't going anywhere, and it really baffled me how this got published at all. The premise of the book is that Tommy and Tuppence have officially retired, and they recently bought this new house. I can't even remember what it's the name of the house. Laurel's. And in this new neighborhood, as they're sorting out their furniture, they basically have this big collection of books that the previous owner had sold to them. And so they're sorting out the books to see which ones they want to keep and which ones they want to donate or give away. And inside one of the books, Tuppence discovers this code. Basically, they are able to decode this like secret message, and the secret message reads out something like, Mary Jordan did not die naturally. I know who did it. It was one of us. Something like that. And that basically kicks off the rest of the plot. Obviously, they have to try and solve this cold case. And that honestly is an interesting enough premise. But again, like I was really bored and I was really frustrated because so much of it genuinely felt like it was the incomprehensible ramblings of an old woman trying to understand or grasp how world politics works. And then I reread Appointment with Death. So I have always planned to make a larger video about this book because it is genuinely one of my absolute favorite Christie books. Like I feel like every time I listen to it, I feel hypnotized by the plot, the characters, and the themes. Like it is so like juicy and meaty. I just get drunk off of the headiness of this beautiful piece of writing. And I needed a palate cleanser after reading Postern of Fate. I think that's the biggest thing. Like I really wanted to read something that I knew I was going to love, and this did not disappoint. I think this is my third time reading this book, and I just feel like ooh, goosebumps even now. And it's funny because I have so many more urgent video scripts that I need to be working on, and instead of working on them, I reread this instead because that's how bad Postern of Fate was. I needed this. It wasn't like a waste of time or anything because one, I enjoyed the experience, and two, since as I mentioned, I do plan on making a much longer dedicated video about this, I ended up writing a few pages of notes that will eventually feed into my much larger and more complete script. Please look out for that. I'm really forward to it because yeah, it's kind of similar to what I did with The Moving Finger. Man, I love this freaking book. And then I read 13 Problems by Agatha Christie still. I think experienced some of the stories, not all of them. Like The Blue Geranium is really popular. I think listened to a BBC radio adaptation of it before. Some of them felt familiar, but they were also familiar in another way. So many of the stories were just like plots that I've already seen from Agatha Christie, but just like with different journeys, like the same destination or solution, but different journeys to get there. So I thought that was really interesting, but also like the way that we got there was like so unique. So the premise of 13 Problems is that it's actually a collection of short stories. However, there is a kind of structure that keeps everything together into a more larger, longer story. The premise is that there is basically two scenarios, technically three, which is the final story, but two scenarios. One, and they're both scenarios are basically people at someone's house at a dinner party. So the first one is we're at Raymond West's home with Miss Marple. Raymond West is Miss Marple's nephew, and there are some guests, including Miss Marple, this woman named Joyce, who we will that's a spoiler, sorry. Joyce, a doctor, I can't remember his name. A priest, I don't remember his name either. And then Sir Henry Clithering. All 6 of them, even Miss Marple, take turns telling stories. Oh, how do you let's try to solve these mysteries. And then only Miss Marple has the final answer for each one, including her own story. And then the second scenario is they're all at Mr. and Mrs. Bantry's house. Same thing, they're having a dinner party with Miss Marple, a doctor, I don't remember his name, Sir Henry Clithering again, and a woman named Jane Hellier, who is an actress. And I was thinking to myself when they were first introducing this set of characters, I was like, why did Agatha Christie name this other person Jane? That's Miss Marple's first name. Like, so curious about that decision until the end, and you're like, whoa, this payoff is so good. I found this really interesting because I have read some of Agatha Christie's short stories before. I'm very familiar with the Hercule Poirot's early cases because those are the ones that were adapted for the BBC TV show with David Suchet. These collection of short stories was the most I've ever encountered Agatha Christie's tendencies for incorporating the supernatural into her murder mystery story. So I felt like there was a lot of spookiness to it. Like, obviously murder mysteries, like there's an inherent scariness to it. This time, like, without explicitly incorporating seances or ghost stories, like this was the first time I've seen her write in a very supernatural way. There were forces outside of our understanding involved in the murder mystery plot. To be fair though, not all of the stories in this collection were murder mysteries. Some of them were just like crimes in general, but like I thought it was very interesting the use of atmosphere and sleight of hand that each character was faced with, and how they were able to convey that spooky sense of fear and atmosphere in the way that they retell their anecdotes to other people. Because usually the intense and hypnotic atmospheres is due to the pressure of the people present or the mystique of the story's setting. So I'm thinking of books like Death on the Nile, Murder in Mesopotamia, Appointment with Death, or where the exotic locations can account for the spell that the characters are put on, or stories where the occasion calls for the spookiness. The only one I can think of right now is Halloween Party, where of course it's gonna be kind of ghostly. It's set in Halloween. I think the way that the short stories were structured did an excellent job of balancing that supernatural atmosphere, almost convincing the reader themselves that maybe there is something supernatural, maybe there are ghosts or spirits involved in this plot. I really enjoyed this. Like, because it's a short story collection and because each story has a different narrator, there is so much, again, meat that I can like sink my teeth into, and there's so many different themes that I can engage with that I haven't been able to in past Agatha Christie novels. So that's very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to like making a longer analysis or review of this book. Moving on to the next book that I read, which is Murder on the Orient Express. I've read this book a lot of times. I've seen the 1974 movie a lot as well. I had downloaded this book for my Wellington trip because the drive down to the city was minimum 7 hours. We ended up driving for 12 because of the amount of times that we took breaks. And I wanted something with me just in case I didn't have any other form of entertainment. Just in case we were outside of the range for my mobile data, I could have something to listen to fall back on. I didn't end up getting super far while I was on the trip because I was much more focused on my trip than I was with the book. I think I finished 60% or 70% of the book. In fact, I think I only got about 30% of the book while I was away, and then I finished everything else when I had gotten back. I chose this book because I wanted something that I was already very familiar with, but still enjoyed enough to kind of pay attention to. Not anything that needed 100% of my brain space, but not something that I was going to be completely bored with as well. Figured that I had written enough notes about this that I wasn't going to come up with anything kind of new, which is why I was so surprised when I found myself a lot more invested in the story than I initially anticipated. And that's when I realized that realization I mentioned in the beginning of the video, where I could go my entire life just with Agatha Christie's bibliography, because enough time will have passed from the first time I read a book and the next time I read a book that I'll have changed in that time in between, and I will be basically reading this text like I was a different person, which is genuinely what happened here. I was always of the opinion that Murder on the Orient Express is slightly, just very slightly overrated. And that's largely because I'm not really a big fan of the way the book is structured. I have a lot of things about the actual way the story plays out, not just the characters or the themes present in the text, which I think makes up for the most entertaining part of the story, but the actual construction of the plot itself. A lot of this mystery is just interrogations. Like, not a lot of things happen, and that's totally fair because, well, they're stuck in a train. There's not really much that can happen. This kind of thing, the only way that you can extract information is through interrogating people. And if you're not a big fan of people talking to this extent, then you're not going to really have a good time. So that's why I actually am of the possibly unpopular opinion that if you want to get into Agatha Christie, this is not the book I would start you off in, because I do not want to give you the impression that all of her books are just people talking. But going back to what I said about becoming a different person after a few years since the last time I read it, not only have I become a different person and my desires for murder mystery books or slash whodunits have changed, like my taste for what they were. I think I mentioned this in another video where sorry, this is off topic, but I initially did not like Appointment with Death, and then I read it again after several years and I was like, whoa, my mind was blown. So this is kind of a similar thing, because not only did I change as a person, but my mind has also become a lot more sharper, and I'm able to articulate particular opinions and pick out certain connotations in the text a lot more than I used to when I first read this initially. I look forward to picking apart the various discussions of class, nationality, gender, and of justice that just flows like a fountain in my mind's eye when I think of this text. I'm not explaining myself at this point, so I'm going to move on. So I'm going to move on to an intermission where I talk about the books that I have purchased recently. So I went to Wellington for a conference for 7 days, and I stayed in Wellington for another 3 days just to be a tourist and hang around. There are 3 bookstores that I was able to visit in Wellington. The first was a place called Pegasus Books. That place is crazy. Like, it is floor to ceiling, full stacked of books. I think their range is a lot more diverse than I would say RTB's books. That's just my opinion from being present in both stores. But in Pegasus Books, I got these absolutely beautiful BBC radio dramatizations. One is Murder in Mesopotamia, which I one of my favorites. This reading experience, reading it for the first time, was crazy. I kicked my feet in the air when I found this there. And I also got one for Hercule Poirot's Christmas, another banger. It's not my absolute personal favorite, but it is such an excellent example of Agatha Christie's skills as a writer. I loved it. And then I also got this textbook for critical sociology. Okay, this is a collection of texts from the very well-known scholars of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt. They're very, very, very famous. And I picked this up in particular because of these 2 people. They have written some really interesting texts about the culture industry that I plan to use in my PhD. And I just thought that having a text like this handy would be really nice, because sometimes, even though everything is available on the internet, it is just nice to have a physical copy to read and give your eyes a break from screens. And then I also got this book called Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. So funnily enough, my dad used to own a copy of this, and I remember him saying that he really liked the short stories when he was growing up. I really liked the cover. It's a very nice shade of green. And this was in the trolley for $5. I decided to purchase it because I remember reading a couple of these short stories and I really enjoyed them. And then the other bookstore that I really liked was called RTB's Books. RTB's Books is a lot more cleaner, organizations. So what I like about them the best is how big their crime slash detective collection is. Like, it was a lot bigger than the collection that Pegasus books have, and it's honestly the biggest I've seen in New Zealand. Yeah. Sadly, they did not have any Agatha Christie books. I had a chat with the owner who was really nice. They were saying like, oh, after Christmas, everyone has already bought all the big names for Christmas presents. So I kind of just stayed there for a bit and I tried to see if I can find any useful texts for my research. And I stumbled across this gorgeous textbook. I was actually on the fence about this for ages. Not only is it's a little bit out of my budget. I don't know if you can tell, but I have no space in my books anyway, and I don't know, I am still currently looking for a job. But it is also heavy, and I was worried about my luggage. But now that I've arrived, I am so glad I bought this because I only had a chance to glance through the table of contents, but all of the stuff here is like incredibly important for what I want to do for my PhD. So I am really glad that I took that like risk, because I was genuinely thinking of not buying this. Again, like, oh, you can just read the text online and stuff. Like, I'm so happy that I have a physical copy. Like, this is like literally my field of research. So good job, me. The last bookstore I went to was this place called Ferret Bookstore. Now, I also really like that. It's a lot smaller than the other two, but oh my goodness, like that store had the most Agatha Christie books I've seen in a long time, like at their store. I was so flabbergasted, but then my hype quickly died down when I realized that even though they have like really awesome copies of specific books, none of them were anything I was looking to keep or collect. Like, for example, they had A Caribbean Mystery, which I hated. They had Sleeping Murder, which I liked, but not enough to purchase. But they also had a copy of Endless Night, which I will get to in a second. I will just wrap up Wellington first. I was so bummed because like this was the first time I've seen so many Agatha Christie books that were like really good condition as well in one place in a while, and then I couldn't even buy any of them because none of them were stuff I specifically wanted to keep. And then let me travel back in time to December. My mom and dad had just gifted me money instead of like a specific gift, which I really appreciated because I'm currently very broke right now. Basically, what I used the $200 for is I was curious about whether I could find secondhand Agatha Christie books online, but then I went to the online website of this store called Hard to Find Books, and they have two locations, one in Dunedin and one in Auckland. So their store only covers their Dunedin catalog, and so I was looking through their website and they had some Agatha Christie books, and you know what? They had freaking Moving Finger, which again, I love this book. I will probably read this with relish somewhere down the line. This edition was published in 1953. Very happy with this this copy, but I also really love this one. So Endless Night, I have a vague idea of what it's about, like the ending slash solution. I think I got spoiled for it. Just a very, very vague, but I'm really looking forward to reading this. Just look at this gorgeous like font. Like, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. I'm literally obsessed. Yeah. And this book was published in 1969. Oh, no, sorry. 1977. This copy in particular. So I'm so happy. I was actually really tempted to buy a second copy of Endless Night when I was at the Ferret bookstore, but I was like, I haven't even read the book. Like, what if I hated this like I did with Caribbean Night and I'll be stuck with a copy of a book that I don't like? Luckily, I held myself off, and that was good because that meant I had money for other things. That's the end of my haul. We're gonna lock back into my final book that I read in January, which is Mysterious Mr Quin. So this was kind of a last minute addition. I was fully intending to finish this video off with a haul, but I ended up reading Mysterious Mr Quin because my loan pulled through towards the end, and oh my god, this is a fucking banger. Like, this may or may not be one of my favorite Agatha Christie texts. Possibly, like, I want to say like top 10, at least top 15. Like, this is so excellent. I don't understand why this isn't as more talked about. I mean, I understand because if you compare it to the grand scheme of Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple's like careers, like, I understand, like, yes, but this is so good. Like, oh my god, like, this is best. I like this a little bit. Do I like this? I think I like this a little bit more than 13 Problems. Like, I think 13 Problems and them are like that, but this is like up there with my favorite Agatha Christie short story collections. This is so insane. The Mysterious Mr. Quin is a collection of short stories that features Mr. Satterthwaite of three-act tragedy fame and the Mysterious Mr. Quin. And I haven't talked about three-act tragedy yet. It is on my back burner right now, but three-act tragedy is like an A-list book from Agatha Christie. My favorite feature about it is Mr. Satterthwaite, who is a character, and his thing is that he is an observer of human life. He loves drama, and he's like Hercule Poirot's age. He's not a detective, but the way that he can kind of have this social awareness that is almost reminiscent of Miss Marple makes him to be a good uncoverer of truth. There's 12 chapters, 12 stories, and basically the first one is when Mr. Satterthwaite meets Mr. Quin for the first time, and then I can't even explain the ending because it would spoil it, but like I have so many thoughts about this book. It's just a delight. Every short story makes me go crazy. Like, again, it's nothing that we've never seen before from Agatha Christie, but the way that it's packaged in this really beautiful like writing, it's driving me crazy. Each story is like Love Island, Love is Blind levels of messy romantic insanity. And as much as I love Mr. Satterthwaite already in Three-Act Tragedy, I really love him in this even more as he navigates this really fascinating dynamic with the eponymous Mr. Quin. And since the collection of short stories was written over a period of years, not only do you get to see Mr. Satterthwaite change over time, his relationships with messy drama change over time, but his relationship with Mr. Quin also change over time. And as usual, I read this basically as a guilty pleasure. Guilty in the sense that I really needed to be doing something else, like work on my PhD or work on my other video scripts, but I just really wanted to read something comforting, which I like. I was immediately hooked with this one. You know, by the end of reading the book, I have absolutely no regrets. And one of the biggest reasons why is that I was gifted with this miraculous sign almost when I reached chapter 3. Chapter 3, the short story is called At the Bells and Motleys. On page 25, Mr. Satterthwaite and Mr. Quin are discussing the details of the crime, and I'll read out the text. No, no, said Mr. Quin, smiling. Since, in our imagination at least, we have power over time, let us turn it the other way. Let us say the disappearance of Captain Harwell took place 100 years ago, that we, in the year 2025, are looking back. You're a strange man, said Mr. Satterthwaite slowly. Like, that's so, like, I was like, wait a damn minute. Is this fucking play about us? I am going to write an entire dedicated video about this, and I'm gonna, like, summarize each short story and talk about each theme that's in there, like, analyze each character, like, implications, everything, the whole shebang. I love this book so much. And you know what? This would make for a really amazing miniseries. 12 episodes with Mr. Quin and Mr. Satterthwaite, like, solving mysteries. That sounds so good. I wish somebody would do that. All right, well, that's all I read in January. A lot slower than what I read in December. January, I will see you guys next time in February, where I summarize what I read in the next coming weeks. So I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know in the comments whether you've read these books before, what your thoughts on them. Do you have any recommendations on what I should read next? To be honest, what I should be reading from this point onwards is journal articles and academic books. Bye!